Extension Family and Consumer Science professionals from across the state of Kansas. Many of our topics will touch on a wide variety of essential skills that empower you and your family to live, work, and thrive. Before we get started, I would like to go over a few housekeeping rules. First, be respectful and open to others throughout the presentation. Feel free to type your questions in the Q&A box or the comments into the chat box. The Q&A does have a feature where you can anonymously ask a question if you're more comfortable with that. Our monitor, Monique, will make sure to go over the questions at the end of the presentation. Today's session will be recorded and posted to our Living Well Wednesday webpage, along with other additional resources. You'll be able to find all future and past programs at our website as well, KSRE Living Well webinars. And lastly, a friendly reminder, our Living Well Wednesday series will discuss a new topic every second and fourth Wednesday in March over the lunch hour. Be sure to check our Living Well website for additional details in registration and details on the registration and topics. I'll go to the next slide. We want to acknowledge that KSRE is an equal opportunity employer. Therefore, we do not discriminate against anyone. If there's anyone that has a special request or concern that you need to allow you to attend one of our programs, please reach out to any agent and we'll make sure that we get that arranged for you. The next slide. We want to thank our presenters for joining us today. Julie Smith is our Family Resource Management Educator in the Wildcat Extension District, and Cassidy Lutz is a Family Consumer Science Agent in the Southwind District. And with that, I will turn it over to these ladies to get started on our presentation.
Thanks, Erin. I'm Julie Smith. Like she said, I'm a Family Consumer Science Agent here in the Wildcat District down in Southeast Kansas. I'm excited to talk to you guys today about this topic that is really important to me. A little bit about me. I live by myself. I have my 16-year-old daughter with me part-time, and with my job, I am constantly on the go. So I'm rarely at home. I don't always do a great job of planning meals. When I do cook, I find that I often waste leftovers because I haven't planned for those. And then eating out is also really expensive. So I'm looking forward to sharing some tips with you today on how to stretch your overall food budget. And I know on Zoom it's a little difficult, but I just really encourage you guys to be interactive. If you have any tips or comments, please share them in the chat as we go along. I know for me, we really are here all to learn together. So with the next slide, guys, get started. There we go. First, we're going to look at some facts according to the USDA Economic Research Service. A home's annual grocery bill was 3.5% higher in 2021 than in 2020. So I think if costs were raising that much in 2021, think about what these numbers might look like for the 2022 that we just finished. On average, consumers spent about 10.3% of their income on food. The high food price inflation can be blamed on a number of things, but specifically since COVID in 2020, I think we've seen a big shift in consumption patterns and also still happening supply chain disruptions. It does feel like that the price of eggs is coming down a little bit, but I know over the last few months, I've changed my patterns just with baking for others because it hurts to pay those prices sometimes. And if you look at this chart, I think that there are a couple of takeaways. First, the cost of food overall has increased. The amount of money that's spent on food at home has raised at a fairly stable rate. But if you look at the food away from home, that has really skyrocketed. And I believe that there are multiple reasons that people are eating out more. But from my personal experience, it's just a lack of planning. We're on the go, we're busy, we've got all these things going on. And we grab and go and eat out a lot. I think right now we're going to launch a poll. Hopefully. I just want to ask you guys, how often do you create a meal plan for your household? And be honest, once a month, weekly, the night before, or what is meal planning? got those numbers coming in. You guys can go to the next slide too, whenever that's done. All right, I think we've got our answer, and I appreciate you guys for being honest. It does look like some folks are really good about planning monthly. Others of you are doing a weekly plan, which I think is awesome. Night before, also very honest, and I appreciate that. That's me and possibly what is meal planning sometimes. So I'm going to stop sharing that, or maybe I can't do that. I don't know. Okay, I have not on my end, so we'll continue. Next slide. The number one tip we're going to talk about today is meal planning. And it's important to actually sit down and write out what your meals are going to be for your family for the week. I think some people are able to do that maybe on their phone digitally. For me, I need to write it down so that I can scratch it out multiple times until I finally get that settled. It also helps you look at your week in a larger scope. So if I know that I am going to have chili on a Sunday, then I start thinking about what am I going to use those leftovers for. It might mean spaghetti red or chili dogs later in the week. Also, you can take some of your leftovers and plan for a soup or something like that the next day. It's really important to take into consideration your family's schedule for the week. So there may be meals that you have to eat out because you're on the go, you're not going to be around home. But I think it's really important to think through that and maybe even know, depending on what town you're going to be in, where you're going to eat. You know, talk with your kids about this is where we're going to go. They can be thinking about what they're going to have. And it helps reduce some of those impulse decisions, sitting in the car saying, where are we going to go? It wastes time too. That happens a lot for our family. When you're meal planning, take stock of what is already in your refrigerator. Try to include those perishable items in your menu. So if you know you've got a big thing of lunch meat that's going to go bad, you may plan an extra day of sandwiches for lunch for your kids to take to school or something like that. Planning also allows us to choose healthier options. When you've got that in mind and you know what's going to happen, it reduces the urge to just grab and go something either at a gas station or a restaurant. When you're planning, try to think about using less processed foods. And there are ways to stretch your budget when it comes to proteins by thinking of cheaper options such as stir fry and casseroles. And I like to think outside the box. So one way that we are able to kind of stretch our food budget, instead of steak and potatoes at dinner, maybe mix it up and have breakfast for supper. I think that that's always fun, and pancakes are fairly cheap when it comes to cooking. Next slide. Now that we have our meal plan, it's time to go shopping. And I think that we are living in a unique time where grocery shopping specifically, looks a lot differently than it used to. And what has changed all that is grocery pickup. You place your order, you show up, you have it delivered to your car. And I have friends that live by this. I mean, they maybe haven't even stepped foot in a Walmart or a grocery store for a couple of years. When we're talking about shopping, our first tip here is to make a list and stick to it. And I think that's a lot easier to do when you're doing grocery pickup. So kudos to folks that love that. It saves time. I maybe on the other side of the spectrum, I actually really like to go to the grocery store and look around. My mom always did that when I was growing up. Like, we'd spend hours in the store looking at stuff, and maybe that's rubbed off on me a little bit. But I think when you are shopping, it is important to remember to stick to your list, or else you end up with all of the fun things on the end caps. Also, some other tips: buy generic. If you have a big family, think about buying in large quantities. For me, that's hard to do because there's a lot of waste when I'm cooking for two. Look for coupons or sales before going to the store. There are still, I think a lot of times we don't even think about paper coupons because none of us are getting the paper anymore. But a lot of stores still do a weekly ad. I know even in my community, our local store is more expensive on a lot of things, but every single week there are things in the ad that are cheaper than you could get at Walmart or even in the next town. So pay attention to sales. Coupons, especially, I don't know where all you guys are at, but I think almost every community in Kansas these days has a Dollar General. So I really like their $5 coupons on Saturday. Be able to stock up on, you can combine those with maybe some manufacturers coupons on the app. And it's always fun to know that you've got a great deal. So I still encourage folks to use coupons whenever you can. And then another tip that is big for me is don't shop while you're hungry. I think we've all done that. And we get home and we think, oh, you know, you bust into the food on the way home, or you end up with all of these extra things that weren't on your list. Next slide. So we've talked about, there we go. Thank you. We've talked about busy schedules and we're always on the go. But let's face it, sometimes we just like to go out to dinner. It's kind of a treat to go out with friends or family. And there are ways to save money even when you're dining out. And so we're going to share just a couple of tips. First, drink water. I don't know how often you guys buy, you know, a Diet Coke or even coffee or tea at a local restaurant, but it will up your meal cost by $2 to $3. So if you're trying to save money, that is probably the best tip, is to drink water. Portions in many restaurants are really large, and then you end up with a box of leftovers that you take home. And if that wasn't a part of your plan, then they sit in your refrigerator until they are thrown out. So maybe another option would be to split a meal if there's someone that you're with that you can agree on the same entree. Also ordering an appetizer instead of a meal, maybe a little bit cheaper and possibly smaller portions so you're not taking home those leftovers. Many restaurants these days have apps and coupons. I mean, even McDonald's, we're talking about planning meals and eating healthy. So McDonald's may not be on the list, but you know, even running through the drive-through to grab a Diet Dr. Pepper, there's an app and I can save money. So don't forget about that. Anytime you go somewhere, be sure and see if there's an app or a coupon, because then if you're able to save money when you do dine out, it just helps stretch your overall food budget for grocery shopping as well. Again, feel free to drop any comments or thoughts or suggestions into the chat box. I'm going to pass this over to Cassidy.
Alrighty, well, thank you, Julie. Looks like we did have one comment in the chat box saying we can also use Dollar General or Family Dollar offers the same, save $5 when you spend $25 after tax. So just know that there are options out there. I know we mentioned a couple of those, so always be on the lookout. That's a great suggestion. So Julie did a really good job of talking about some of those first items that we can address when we're looking at our food budget. But I am going to kind of flip the script a little bit and think about the other side of things, and that is food waste. So the USDA Economic Research Service estimates the average family of 4 loses $1,500 per year on uneaten food. That's a lot of money. I know I could benefit from having that added money back in my bank account, and I'm sure many of you could as well, because anything that we can save, we want to. So we can reduce this number in a couple different ways. Some things we can't control, other things we can. Maybe your schedule changes for the week, and like Julie had mentioned, you're on the go and you're eating out when you hadn't planned to. And that's okay. Schedules change all the time, but there are certain things that we can do to help save some of our money. And I'm going to address some of those now. So go on to the next slide. Okay, so one of the first easy things we can do is to only buy what we need as we need it. This is really important as we're talking about fresh produce and those meat items. If we're only buying those things that we intend to use before they go bad, you're not going to have that leftover waste that you will have to result to throwing in the trash. Next is proper food storage. This is really important because if we're keeping our foods properly stored, we can keep them better for longer times. So that's looking at using the correct containers. I don't know if many of you know on here today, but there are actually containers designed for use in both the refrigerator and the freezer. So if you're looking at your Tupperware containers, you can look at the bottom, and if they are intended for freezer storage, they will have a little snowflake emblem, as you can see there on the screen. That's really important because when we're talking about freezer storage, if your foods are getting frostbite and like kind of have that icy outer rim on them, that can deteriorate the texture and the quality of the food, and you're not going to be likely to eat that later on down the road. So when we're storing our food in the freezer, it's important that we're keeping it good and fresh. That way, when we go to cook it the second time around, we actually want to eat it and enjoy it, and we don't just throw it away. The same is true for Ziploc baggies. So I know Ziplocs can be good for a number of different things. There are Ziplocs intended both for just like freezer or counter storage, and there's one specifically made for the freezer. So again, on the box when you buy those, they will say freezer storage bags. The next piece, as we're talking about proper food storage, is looking at our temperatures of our freezer and our refrigerator. This is really important because we want to keep food safe and good for as long as possible. So your fridge should be at or below 40 degrees Fahrenheit, and your freezer should be at or below 0 degrees Fahrenheit. Now, you're not going to know your temperature unless you're using a thermometer. So I highly recommend using an appliance thermometer in both of your freezer and your refrigerator. I would also encourage you not to keep it on your door. So if you have shelves that you like to put things on, try not to put your thermometer there because you might not get an accurate reading because you're opening and closing your door often. So try to put it in more of those temperature stable portions like on a shelf and towards the back of your unit. And then the last tip on this slide would be first in, first out method. I try to follow this, especially when we're talking about meal planning, because it puts those foods that you've had longer at the front of your brain, so to speak, right? You're using those foods that you've had on hand the longest and incorporating those into your meal plan. That way you're using all the food and you're not leaving some that sit in the back of the pantry where you're not going to look for 2, 3, 4 months on end, and then you forget about them and have to throw them away. So next slide. Okay, and I'm also going to have Sherilyn go ahead and launch a poll question for us. And I want us to think about how often we're going through and cleaning out our pantry and our refrigerator. Now, I know your refrigerator you might clean out more often, but kind of give us a general idea of how often you're getting an idea of what you have on hand. And be honest, it's okay if this is a shocking realization for you. Okay, wonderful. We've got all of our answers, and it looks like we've got people all over the spectrum. So we've got some that look once or more a week and then clear down to once every few months. And that's okay, as long as we're acknowledging that and trying to get better about checking our foods. So we can go ahead and end that poll. So there's ways that we can extend the shelf life of our foods. First and foremost, we want to make sure we're keeping our foods separate. And this is especially true in our refrigerator. So if you have meats on hand that you're thawing out, you want to place those on the bottom shelves. That way, if there's any drippings as that seeps out, it's not leaking onto other foods. If that happens, you're likely going to be throwing foods away. So if at all possible, keep foods separate. Next is look for proper storage temperatures of fruits and vegetables. These items can go bad really quick if we're not keeping them in the right storage conditions. So there's a couple resources that we're going to share today in the chat that you can use to help guide you in how to store your foods properly. You want to also keep condiments and preserved foods on the door as they can handle a wider temperature range. Now, I know a lot of people, when they get the half-gallon jugs of milk, that's an easy places to put it on the door, but that can lead your food to spoil quicker. So you want to use some of those things that can handle a wider temperature range, put those on the door and keep those more shelf not so stable items on a fridge in the more temperature stable part of your fridge. So that would be your milk, your dairy, your eggs, cheeses, anything like that that goes bad a little bit quicker. And then we also want to preserve or freeze foods if we know we're not going to use them, right? Like Julie had mentioned, we're going to start creating a meal plan. So we're going to have an idea of what foods we want on hand throughout the week. If we have extra food in our fridge that we know we're not going to use and it can be frozen, we want to go ahead and do that. She also mentioned buying in bulk. I think one important thing to note here is if you find a good deal at the grocery store, you want to take advantage of that, right? Because that's going to save you money on the front side. But when you take that bulk cut of meat home, maybe you can break it apart. Maybe you only want to use one portion of it for your month or your weekly plan, and then you can freeze the other half of it for meals later on in the month. So that would be a good suggestion there as well. Okay, go on to the next slide. Okay, and the next thing we're going to talk about is our food product date labels. Now, for consumers, these can be very confusing because a lot of us think that they are indicators of safety, which is not the case at all. Foods can either spoil before their dates or after their dates. There's no real good indicator. These are just recommendations of when to buy and use them by. So first we have our sell by date. This tells retail stores how long to display food products for sale. So this means you should buy the product in a store by or before that date. The next is our use by or best by dates. This is recommendation for best quality and flavor. Again, this typically has nothing to do with safety, mainly just the quality of the food and the flavor. And use by dates are recommended by the manufacturer for the product while at peak quality. Again, that's a quality indicator. That being said, there are some products that you can get away with using even after their date. The perfect example I like to think of is milk, right? Sometimes we get a gallon of milk that spoils way too quick, it seems like, even before the date. And other times we might have some milk still in our fridge, maybe 2 or 3 days after that date that's listed, that seems perfectly fine. And that's okay. You can still consume those products if they are of best quality. Use your best judgment. You want to make sure you're using your senses, like your smell and your sight, and even your taste to tell you if that food is still good or not. After all, if you cannot waste food and use it and incorporate it into a meal in the next day or two, we want to do that instead of just immediately thinking that it's bad and throwing it away. So infant formula is the one exception to that rule. This is the category of food that should be followed by that date that's printed on there. If it's past that date, it needs to go. Other than that, use your best senses. For the most part, some foods tend to stay better after that date and others, it just depends. And lastly, when in doubt, throw it out, right? Saving money is great for all of us and we want to try as much as we can, but that won't make a difference if we get sick from the food that we're consuming because we're trying to save money and end up with a hospital bill because we're sick. So use your best senses, try to gauge what food is good and bad instead of immediately just throwing it out based on a recommendation. All righty, Sherilyn, go ahead and advance. So after hearing some of the information that Julie and I covered today, you can put some of these tips into practice to help save you and your family some money. I know in today's economic climate, many consumers are looking for ways to save, and starting with your food budget can be an easy way to start. With that, we'll go ahead and open up the floor for any questions that we have. Again, you can either drop them into the chat box, the Q&A, or you can unmute and ask us. Okay, seems like we have none. Ashley, did you have any questions that came into the Q&A feature while we were going today?
No, I did not see any.
I think we do have a question.
Okay, yep, we just got one in. Okay, perfect. What about those colored bags for bananas? Do they work or are they necessary?
So when we're talking colored bags, are we talking the things that you put your produce in at the store, just like the plastic ones? or like a special one that we've bought specifically for bananas?
I think they're probably talking about like those, I've seen those yellow bags that are advertised to put just your bananas in.
Okay, I had not heard of that. So that's a new one for me. You would definitely want to look at the manufacturer's instructions or recommendations for that. There may be something in there that helps preserve those bananas a little bit quicker. There may not. It might just completely depend what that product is made of, if it helps slow that ripening process or not.
I know for me, I've tried those bags before. Unfortunately, it's better for me to have the bananas sit out on the counter because when I see them, I put them in the bag and maybe they did last longer, but I forgot about them. So, that's just kind of, I don't think it's necessary, but it would be fun to maybe try out.
Hey, we did get another. Are there any new breakthroughs in price or use of home freeze drying machines?
Julie might want to answer on to this too, but I know I have seen some price breakdowns, and the ones that I've seen are looking at extended periods of time. So it might save you money over the long haul if you're going to invest in that type of a product and really buy the right equipment to maybe freeze things better. Again, that's going to be more of a long haul investment. I don't know if you're planning on maybe buying it and just testing it out. It probably won't save you that much money on the short term, but on long term, it might have those benefits depending on how much you use it. Okay, if there are no other questions today, I think that concludes our presentation. Thank you guys for having us on.
Thank you.
All right, we want to thank Cassidy and Julie for taking time to do this presentation today. I'm sure many of you have learned something new that you can take home and practice. We do encourage you all to complete our survey by using the QR code on the screen. This will also be sent to you right after our presentation today, and will also is available on our Living Well website. And feel free to provide comments and suggestions. We hope that you continue to join us every second and fourth Wednesday. Our next program topic is called Family Meals, Nutrition and Skills to Get You Started. And this will take place on March 22nd. And lastly, if you'd like more information or additional resources, please reach out to your local extension agent. If you're not sure where your local office is, you can find it by going to ksre.kstate.edu, and you'll be able to hover over your county and you can find the location of your local office. Again, thank you and have a great rest of your afternoon.